Right, okay, transition, start the downswing, arguably the most important part of the golf swing, which we're going to rediscuss again today. As ever, this is prompted by videos that have come into the channel, right? It's free for you guys to send them in as well. You just get some free advice. I annotate over the videos on a weekly basis, and it's just to make sure that you're working on the right sort of things. If you want to do that, the social media links are in the description below. Now, what I'm starting to see is golfers that are struggling at the start of the downswing, which is the most important part. In my opinion, the reason why it's the most important part is because a lot of things in the golf swing coming into pre-impact are going to have to happen very naturally. Mainly due to the fact that it's happening so fast that we couldn't consciously really do much anyway. But second to that, there's going to be a lot of laws of physics that are going to be happening naturally as well. Same as when you do things like throw a stone or anything like that. You wouldn't really be able to overly complicate it. You would have to just let it happen. The transition is the start of the downswing, and it's arguably a part of the swing that you can obviously change, right? Now, what needs to happen at the start of the downswing is just a couple of things. Right, the first thing that needs to happen is that as we initiate the downswing, you need to make sure that you are basically not creating an early extension, which basically means the hips can't move in this manner. The way you counteract that is basically when you swing up to the top. For those of you that video your swing, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get your left hip back onto your hip line. So both the left and the right hip are on the same sort of, in theory, plane as you start to transition into this downswing position. That is an important thing because basically what this is doing now is it's creating space. It's helping me put weight pressure in towards the left-hand side, right? And it's helping me create an element of separation. And an element of separation basically means it stops us from swinging completely over the top. Now, the way you do this, and a good feeling that I've mentioned before on the channel, is that you want to try and get the sense that the belt buckle is working more down towards your left ankle. Because basically the hips are going to actually go what's known into a more anterior tilt, which means they're going to go more downward facing as we start the downswing. Now again, this helps us shift pressure, it helps us trigger rotation. From the face-on perspective, it allows the left thigh and the left knee to move more towards the target. So these are things that, you know, if you've seen video content on the channel before, or you're somebody who watches a lot of other content, you know that that needs to exist. Now, what I would just kind of suggest as well is some golfers have been coming for lessons and they've been really working hard on the lower body, but they are kind of fighting again a little bit with the upper body, right? Now I'm going to talk about, you know, the transition of the upper body a little bit more detail in a moment, and in definitely more detail in the upcoming videos. But one of the things I would suggest is that the left shoulder still naturally needs to work its way around as well. So my point is, from this face-on perspective, what you've got to be careful of is that you don't just try and leave the upper body behind in this sort of manner, because from here you're going to get stuck behind the ball. You have to allow the left shoulder to naturally work over as well with you. So the left shoulder is working over because that's going to allow the club to drop down, right? That is something that you need to do. You don't want to try and fight it in this sort of manner. So the question would be, why are those golfers doing this and why do you end up getting stuck behind the ball? Well, one of the things that I've started to see with some of the guys that have been coming for lessons is that they're consciously really trying to drive the right elbow at the start of the downswing. And that's fine, right? And I'll lead on to that a little bit more detail in a moment. But the problem is if you try and drive the right elbow at the start of the downswing and you don't start to trigger a lower body rotation at the same sort of time, then what will happen is that you're just going to get kind of too tilted behind the ball. So if I try and drive my right elbow, it ends up kind of creating an element of hip extension, and it means you end up looking more this sort of position, which is somewhere where you definitely don't want to be. So although from a side-on perspective, you might be quite pleased that the shaft angle looks more shallow, which is probably what you're trying to achieve, the problem is you're never going to hit it any better because you're just going to get stuck behind the ball. And like I'm saying to you, the transition's important because, you know, wherever you are at this sort of position, the hit itself is going to be relatively natural, and it's not something that you want to overthink about too much detail. Okay, the point is then that has to exist, right? The idea of driving the hips down and the idea of getting the left shoulder to naturally work around, right? You want to create a subtle amount of separation, like I said before, which basically means you watch my right shoulder, I'm able to move my lower body without the right shoulder moving too much. Now, I'll create content for golfers who don't have a great range of motion around the spine and say the hips. in content in the upcoming future. But I'm making the general assumption that anyone who's watching this and is going to be trying to introduce it into their game, they have a decent range of motion, which means you have the ability to be able to start to move the hips in the start of the downswing. That's important because it gives you the separation. Like I said, just be careful that you don't fall back and you allow naturally the left arm to work around. Now, what I'm going to talk about very briefly today, but in more detail in the upcoming weeks, and what I'm trying to educate people on the channel at this moment in time, is that it's your choice as to how you start the downswing, right? If you're somebody who likes the concept of trying to go more shallow, therefore you're going to try and drive the elbow more in front of the right hip, then that's fine. If you're somebody who is just going to naturally pull down the club more and therefore the shaft would come down, more vertical than our shallowing, but still theoretically on plane, then that's fine as well. There'll be differences in the hit for both of these golfers, and that's my point. I'll talk about those in more detail. But what I am trying to say is that fundamentally you have to be able to move the hips, as I've mentioned in this video, and you have to be able to do that without leaving the upper body too far behind. So even if you're somebody who's trying to drive the elbow, you still have to allow the left shoulder to work across. And if you're somebody who's going to pull the club, exactly the same as well. The rest of it will be your choice, and that's something that I'll be talking about in the upcoming videos. But if you're going to go away and work on anything, if you're going to go and video your swing, by the time you get to left arm horizontal as you're coming down, this is your transition, and this is about as much, I think, as you can still be thinking about and feeling. You want to make sure that your hips are parallel towards target. If you draw a line on the back of the right hip, the left hip is back on it. And if you video it from face on, you just want to make sure the left knee and the left thigh are moving more towards the target, and the shoulder should be coming around very naturally as well towards that left ankle position. You just don't want to get caught back in this manner. If you can get yourself into that sort of position, then generally the rest of it will become your choice, and that's something that I'll talk about in more detail. As I mentioned earlier, it's absolutely free to send the swings in. The links are in the description below. It's also free to press subscribe, press the little bell icon as well. You'll receive notifications every time a new video comes out, and I'll catch up with you again soon.